All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline. I'm a marketing manager here at 3 Degrees. I'd like to welcome you to Climate Day. This is a full day of virtual events focused on empowering businesses to take meaningful climate action. We kicked off the event with the state of the APAC market and European perspective on renewable energy strategies. And now we will be diving into carbon removal strategy. We'll be recording all of the webinars today. So for those who registered but can't attend, no need to worry there. A few housekeeping items. We will have a Q&A chat box. So feel free to put your questions into that, and we'll have time toward the end to answer all of those inquiries. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. We have Alex Procton joining us today from Forest Trends Association. We have Donna Lee, co-founder at Calyx Global, joining us today. And then from 3 Degrees, we have two speakers, Tori Hoffmeister, a manager on the climate strategy team, and Emma Friedel, a consultant on the climate strategy team. And Emma, you can go ahead and take it away. She'll be telling us a little bit about 3 Degrees and setting us up for our carbon removals session.
Great, thanks, Caroline. So again, thanks everyone for joining us for this session on carbon dioxide removal. My name is Emma Friedel, and I'm a senior consultant on the strategy consulting team here at 3 Degrees. So for those who aren't familiar, we're a global climate change solutions provider, and we've been in the business for over 20 years. And our mission is to make it possible for businesses and their customers to take urgent action on climate change. We have deep expertise in climate strategy and implementation across scopes 1 through 3 emissions. And most folks may know about 3 Degrees from the environmental commodities that we offer, but our services also include carbon project development, transportation decarbonization, utility programs, and our consulting practice, which is where Tori and I sit. And we advise companies on a number of strategic initiatives, including target evaluation, net zero road mapping, supplier engagement, and of course, carbon strategy. So we have a packed agenda today with some great topics and partners. I'll start us off with a level setting on carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, as you'll likely hear me say for the rest of the webinar. That'll include why CDR is important, types of projects, and common quality criteria buyers consider. And then we'll hear from our fantastic partners, Alex Procton at Forest Trends, followed by Donna Lee at Calyx, who will provide insights on the state of the CDR market. And then finally, Tori Hoffmeister from 3 Degrees will speak about how companies can tactically incorporate carbon removals into a credible climate strategy. As Caroline said, feel free to save your questions or put them in the chat throughout. We'll try to save some time at the end for questions, and anything we don't get to, we'll definitely try to reach back out and answer them. So with that, I will get us started with our level setting section. And if you're on this call, you're likely aware that we need to reach net zero by 2050 to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And direct emission reductions are, of course, the most critical aspect to meeting this target. But the science shows that we can't rely on emission reductions alone. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, tells us that even with the most ambitious decarbonization efforts, we'll still need to also remove up to 10 billion tons of greenhouse gases annually by 2050 to stay on track. And global net zero standards like the Science Based Target Initiative and Race to Net Zero make it clear that achieving net zero isn't just about cutting emissions. It's also about neutralizing residual, hard to abate emissions with high quality removals. The chart to the right puts that carbon removal challenge into perspective. That teeny tiny dot represents the volume of novel carbon removals delivered in 2023. So small that it's been multiplied by 100 just to make it visible. And now compare that to the much larger circle, which represents the gigaton scale removals needed by 2050 to stay on track for a 1.5 degree world. We need to scale removals by orders of magnitude in the next 25 years. And that means building the markets, technologies, and infrastructure needed to ensure these solutions are available at scale when we need them most. So with that intro, we'll get into what we mean by carbon removals. There's no single solution to removing carbon at scale. we'll need a portfolio of approaches that leverage both nature and technology-based solutions. And we can categorize carbon removal projects into three broad types: biological, engineered, and hybrid solutions. Biological solutions use natural processes to capture and store carbon. So this includes wetlands restoration, which is revitalizing coastal and freshwater ecosystems for carbon sinks. It includes improved forest management and reforestation, which are either changing forestry practices or even planting new forests to absorb CO2. And it includes regenerative agriculture or improved farming methods that build soil carbon. On the other hand, engineered solutions use industrial processes to remove carbon from the atmosphere and lock it away. Examples here include CO2 storage in concrete. So this is actually injecting captured carbon into building materials like concrete, where it remains locked in permanently. And it also includes direct air capture with carbon storage, or DACs, which are machines that actually extract CO2 directly from the air and store it underground. Hybrid solutions are then a combination of biological and technological processes to enhance carbon removal. That can include biochar, which is converting organic waste into a stable form of carbon that's then stored, or bioenergy with carbon storage, or BECCS, which uses biomass for energy and then captures and stores the CO2 that's emitted. So this is just a snapshot. There are numerous emerging solutions and innovative project types also being developed. Overall, you'll notice that some of these approaches focus exclusively on carbon removal, while others generate both removals and avoidance benefits. So for example, improved forest management can prevent emissions from deforestation while also sequestering or removing carbon. And this underscores the important point that reaching net zero isn't just about removals. It's going to use a combination of both reductions, avoidance, and removals in tandem to drive real climate impact. Shifting to our next important question, what makes a high quality carbon removal credit? Not all credits are created equal. I'm sure many of you have heard of carbon criticisms in recent years, and carbon projects can, however, be extremely high quality, but buyers need to assess several key criteria to ensure they are making a real impact and mitigating risk. So when evaluating carbon removal credits, buyers typically look at 5 critical factors. First, we have durability, or how long the carbon stays removed. Some solutions, like storing carbon in concrete, lock away carbon for thousands of years, while nature-based approaches like reforestation lock in carbon for just a few decades. Then we have reversal risk, and this refers to the potential for stored carbon to be released back into the atmosphere. A good example of this might be a reforestation project being vulnerable to wildfires and reversing all of the carbon that was stored in those trees. Buyers need to consider how projects mitigate this risk of reversal, whether it's through buffer pools, insurance mechanisms, or robust monitoring. Third is net negativity. So the question here is, does this project actually remove more CO2 than it emits? And this is an important question because some carbon removal methods require energy or resources to operate. And so a true removal credit must account for the full life cycle of emissions to ensure it's delivering an actual net negative impact. Fourth is additionality. Would this removal have happened without the credit funding? So a high quality credit represents a carbon removal that wouldn't have occurred otherwise, meaning the financing directly enabled more carbon removals that would have happened under a business as usual scenario. And finally, number 5 is verifiability. Can the carbon removal be accurately measured and independently verified? Buyers need confidence that the claimed removals are real, quantifiable, and monitored. And this is why third-party verification and registries are essential in building trust in the market. So when buyers are investing, they're looking at these criteria. They're looking for durable, additional, verifiable removals that truly contribute to reaching targets. And understanding these criteria is essential for making informed decisions. I know Donna from Calyx has great insights, for example, on how companies can assess the quality of a carbon project. So she'll tell you more about that when she gets into her section. But for now, I want to provide a snapshot on how exactly carbon removals can fit into a broader climate strategy. knowing that Tori will dive deeper into this later. In a credible net zero strategy, companies should focus on emission reductions first and foremost, and removals are used for neutralization, balancing out any residual emissions at the target year. So that's what you're seeing on the left side of the screen. Because even with the most aggressive decarbonization efforts, some emissions, like those from aviation, heavy industry, or agriculture, will be difficult to eliminate completely. And so that's why removals are essential for achieving true net zero. But companies shouldn't and can't wait until their target year to start engaging with the carbon market, because as we've discussed, carbon removals need investment now to ensure these technologies are at scale when we need them most. So on the right-hand side, you'll see the Oxford Principles for Net Zero Aligned Offsetting, which lay out a best practice approach for building a carbon credit portfolio over time. After prioritizing direct emission reductions, support high-quality carbon projects. This means supporting a mix of removals and reductions in the short and medium term to help protect carbon already stored and accelerate the transition to a low carbon society. Then companies should gradually increase the portion of the portfolio that's from removals and neutralize all residual emissions with removals by the net zero year. And at the same time, those removals should gradually shift to removals with increasing durability or permanence with low risk of reversal. So those are some of the criteria we discussed in the last slide. The goal here is to shift more towards those highly durable projects, which tend to be the engineered removal types. Throughout this journey and beyond it, the final principle is to contribute additional benefits by supporting the development of innovative approaches to achieving net zero, which might mean de-risking project finance, forming or joining alliances, or investing in beyond value chain mitigation. The big message here is you don't need to wait to participate in the carbon removals or even broader carbon market. Companies should start integrating removals into their strategy today, not just in the year they aim to hit net zero, because by investing early, they can help scale the market, secure future supply, and build a more credible and effective path to net zero. So I want to end with taking a step back at looking at the bigger picture, which is the current state of carbon removals and the carbon removals market. This is a rapidly evolving space. I'm going to pass it to Alex next to take us deeper into the details, but I'll start with 3 key dynamics shaping the market today. First, supply is limited and scaling is a major challenge. While demand for high quality removals is growing, today's supply is far from what we need to reach net zero. Many removal solutions are still early stage, and significant investment is required to bring costs down and scale them effectively. Second, third-party methodologies are still evolving, and robust science-backed frameworks are critical for ensuring credibility. Today, many approaches lack standardized methodologies for measuring, verifying, and certifying credits, but these frameworks are developing and will continue to shape how the market grows. And finally, there is ongoing uncertainty around how net zero standards will define eligible removals, and organizations setting corporate targets do need clarity on what counts, especially as the standards are evolving. And that uncertainty does make long-term planning challenging, but it also highlights the importance of staying engaged with market developments, and it means that there's an exciting opportunity to help shape how this market evolves. And with that, I will hand it over to Alex from Forest Trends to take us deeper into the state of the market.
Thank you, Emma. So, as mentioned, I am here from Ecosystem Marketplace, which is an initiative of the nonprofit Forest Trends. Forest Trends as a whole is focused on finance for forest conservation, especially focused around supporting the people who live in and take care of forest habitats that contain so much of the biodiversity on the planet. Ecosystem Marketplace, we focus specifically on environmental markets as a mechanism for achieving that finance for forests and natural habitats around the world. Especially for the last 20 years, we've been very involved with carbon markets, publishing our annual State of the Voluntary Carbon Market Report since 2007, and acting as a trusted intermediary in the carbon markets who can actually analyze carbon data without having a financial stake in the market themselves or in the success or failure of specific products or projects. We've also published reports on the corporate buyers of carbon credits, reports on blue carbon, as well as collaborations with other initiatives within forest trends like our water initiative and our communities and territorial governance initiative. Next slide. And just to highlight, the data that I will be sharing today comes from the hundreds of market actors who've shared data with Ecosystem Marketplace for our State of BCM report. And in 2023, we launched our Global Carbon Markets Hub. And last year, we upgraded that to provide an interactive platform for the general public and for our respondents to view both respondents' own data, but also the larger data from the carbon market that we share in the State of BCM report. So I would encourage you to take a look at that after this presentation if you're interested in learning more about the broader carbon market and what types of credits have been traded and what's available. That's at hub.ecosystemmarketplace.com. And we have data from over 20,000 projects, over 60,000 transactions that have been reported over the last 5 years and continuing to grow. Great. So looking at the broad voluntary carbon market and trying to understand what is the volume of removal credits that are actually being traded. So as Emma really established, there are a lot of projects that issue credits that count as both reductions and removals. And these are these nature-based projects where you generate removals of carbon by actually increasing woody biomass, increasing carbon that's stored in soils. But there's also reductions of carbon emissions because the counterfactual scenario for calculating additionality, you would have land use change that would release more emissions than a forested or a natural landscape. And so since 2020, the volume or the proportion of credits that are only from reductions has decreased in the BCM, but that growth in removal credits has really been largely driven by a growth in these nature-based project types that are issuing both removals and reductions. And then in 2023, there were about 4 million tons of pure removal credits, and almost all of those came from afforestation and reforestation projects. And I'll take a little bit of a closer look at these different types of credits. So in the next slide, we'll see some of the price dynamics over the last 4 years. First on the left, looking at these nature-based project types, which issue both reductions and removals, excluding the projects that are only providing reduction credits. And so these main project types are going to be IFM, or improved forest management, REDD+, which are projects related to reducing deforestation in tropical countries, avoiding planned or unplanned deforestation, as well as some activities that involve increasing forest cover. Blue carbon projects, so these will be projects that are associated with wetland habitats such as mangroves, seagrasses, or terrestrial wetlands, and then agriculture projects relating to soil carbon, and then these other nature-based solutions projects. That's mostly afforestation, whether it's in a wild context or an urban context. And so there's really a lot of volatility in these prices for most of these project clusters that we examine. We're seeing that improved forest management, which is the dark blue line, those prices have grown steadily, and that reflects the fact that these projects offer a lot of flexibility to landowners who implement them. Improved forest management projects generate credits reliably, but they also allow you to have other sources of revenue from forests. So you're able to harvest timber from forests. You're able to make money in other ways off of these forested lands. And blue carbon projects, they can be more expensive on average, especially mangrove restoration projects. And so we're seeing this volatility in the price of blue carbon projects that's largely associated with the proportion of projects that are coming from mangrove restoration versus other wetland restoration and wetland reforestation type projects. And that really reflects both the cost of development for these projects, which is higher than your typical nature-based project, as well as the extensive community and biodiversity co-benefits that they offer, whether that's coastal resiliency, providing habitat in mangroves, et cetera. Now, on the right, we're looking at the price history for pure removal credits. And so we have the dark green line, afforestation, reforestation, the blue line, blue carbon, and then in purple, we have all other project types, whether that's any sort of engineered removal, whether that's something like a biochar production project, DAX project that Emma was describing before. What I want to point out is that essentially the entire graph on the left fits in the bottom 1/5 of this graph on the right. The y-axes are completely different, and the cost for these technological removal projects like DAX and biochar can be 10 to 30 times as expensive as the nature-based solutions. So we actually have seen steady price increases for afforestation and reforestation, which we'll see in a moment makes up really the vast majority of these credits. But when we look at it on this axis, that includes technological removals, we really see a huge difference in price between technological removals and nature-based removals. And that reflects a lot of trade-offs that are being made in terms of co-benefits, the durability of these removals, the narrative that you want to tell around these removals, and just the maturity of this technology. And if we can go to the next slide. I would just zoom in now to these pure removal credits. And on the right, this graph shows all of the carbon removal credits that have been issued to date. And this is data from the major carbon registries like ACR, CAR, CDM, Gold Standard, and Vera, as well as specific removal-based registries like Reverse, Isometric, and Perot Earth. And we see that 92% of all carbon removal credits that have ever been issued come from afforestation and reforestation projects. So this is the main way at the moment that the market provides removal credits. Some other notable project types, 5% of credits that have been issued are from agroforestry projects. So these are projects where trees and shrubs are actually planted on or adjacent to farmland or pasture. And so that's a pure increase in carbon in the biomass that's there, and it doesn't necessarily affect crop yields, or it can actually benefit things like livestock production. Blue carbon actually makes up 2% of all of the carbon removal credits that have been issued. And then coming in at just 1%, we see these nascent industrial carbon removal technologies. So definitely very much an emerging part of the market, and often it's coming through these standards that specifically focus on issuing removal credits from technological removal projects. So this is what we've seen so far. We're currently collecting data for our 2025 State of the Voluntary Carbon Market Report, which we plan to publish in the first half of the year. So we'll be able to provide an update on 2024, looking backward, but I would expect to see largely that it's a lot of removals coming from these nature-based projects still.
Great. I guess it's my turn. So thanks very much, Emma and Alex. I'm reminded as both of you spoke that you both represent organizations that have been around for a long time. So you and your organizations have a lot of in-depth experience in the markets. I guess I've been around for couple of decades in the market too, but the company that I represent and co-founded is relatively new. So if you don't know Calyx Global, we are a carbon credit ratings agency. Our mission, which is really important for our company, is we say better carbon markets for the planet and for people. So when we look at carbon credits and assess their quality, we're looking at both the greenhouse gas integrity is a ton, as well as sustainable development benefits. We call that our SDG ratings, which we also have where a project is certified for these additional kind of beyond carbon attributes. And we also started looking more recently at environmental and social risks. So ensuring that projects have appropriate management in place to avoid risks to people and the environment, like biodiversity, other non-carbon elements. We have assessed nearly 700 projects. So we've looked at a lot of projects across many different project types. We are sector neutral. We look at everything from landfill gas, HFCs, forests, cook stoves, as well as some of the newer durable carbon removal CDR types. We provide independent science-based analysis on carbon credits. So that's who we are. But today's webinar is about removals. So maybe if we can go to the next slide. I just wanted to show this because I feel there is a misperception in the market today that somehow removals are higher quality. On average, what we find, and this is based on our hundreds of ratings across both avoidance and removal project types, is that they're about the same in terms of quality. So why is there this misunderstanding? I'm not sure. I think part of it is that the media itself has not been unbiased. They've really focused on a few project types. This started out, a decade ago with a lot of media coverage of renewable energy projects and how they weren't additional. More recently, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there were a lot of articles written about RED projects, these forest protection or reducing emissions from deforestation projects, and even more recently, maybe cook stoves. All of those happen to be avoidance project types. What the media hasn't focused on are some of the removal-based projects that also can face integrity issues. So you can see here, we do have a number of projects rated kind of in that C and D, higher risk removal-based projects. And these are things like monoculture commercial plantations that one can really question whether they're additional because they're in a country maybe with lots of these they're harvesting, they're making a lot of money out of that harvest. They're in a country where we see lots of commercial plantations that don't benefit from carbon. So it's all to say avoidance removal, we really don't see a difference when we're talking about quality or greenhouse gas integrity. So if we go to our next slide, there's 2 different types of CDR. Actually, I like that 3 Degrees showed there's actually 3 types because they had a hybrid in between these 2. So I've sort of oversimplified this into engineered and nature-based. And again, when we look at these 2 different types, there are pros and cons to each. So if we look at engineered removals, those tend to be perhaps more durable. They can have a lifetime that can be assured, let's say, for anywhere from hundreds to thousands of years. However, they're lower volumes, right? And they're much more expensive. If we look at nature-based projects, yes, they might have a higher risk of what we call non-permanence. However, they are available today in larger volumes at lower cost. These nature-based projects also provide a lot of benefits beyond carbon. A lot of them do protect and help to restore biodiversity ecosystems, and oftentimes provide other social benefits. So each of these nature and engineered have both benefits and risks to them. If we go to my next slide, this shows the distribution of quality between these 2 different types, nature-based and durable CDR. And you can see there the types of nature-based that are demonstrated, I guess, in this graph, although I think Alex's point that the vast majority are afforestation, reforestation, and that's true of our ratings as well. We also have soil carbon and ag land management, blue carbon, grassland management that can also remove carbon, but the vast majority is afforestation, reforestation. We also have some of these more durable or engineered removal-based projects. Here in our graph, we include biochar and bio-oil. We do not include concrete. We have rated concrete, but it's mostly an avoidance. So that's why it's not in this chart. And then coming soon, we should soon have on our platform also direct air capture and enhanced rock weathering. But I think that the key thing to take away from this graph is that engineered removals are not a slam dunk. I think a lot of people think they are, and then put nature-based in the more risky category. It is true that they can tend to be higher integrity, but we've seen both, right? We've seen also kind of middling and lower quality as well in the engineered removals. Okay, the last slide is my last one here. This is around pricing. And so I should have put this in the slide, but this is thanks in part to Clear Blue Markets. So Clear Blue Markets has a lot of data points on pricing. We combine their data set on pricing with our large data set on quality and of our ratings data set. And we came up with this pricing graph. And the thing to focus on is the difference between the purple and the yellow dot. So purple is removal credits, yellow is avoidance. And what you see is that removal credits, the pricings quote, they float. Like all those top, at the top of the graph are all removal prices. And this is regardless of quality. And I think that's really interesting. So in some ways, it's great if a buyer wants to pay more, especially for these technologies that Emma mentioned, we absolutely will need given our trajectory right now. So I think it's fantastic that we have some buyers that are willing to pay, even beyond this $50, hundreds of dollars to help pay down the green premium to get these technologies off the ground. But if you really just want to do something for climate, buying a high quality avoidance, turning off the tap to stop filling up the bathtub, in that analogy, can be a great way to contribute to climate change mitigation. And you can find really high quality avoidance credits at lower prices. So I think both are valid approaches to tackling climate change. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Donna. So taking all of those really useful updates we just heard on removals quality and pricing in the market right now, we're going to take a step back to again consider what all of this means for actually incorporating removals at this moment into a high integrity corporate climate strategy. So we recommend using a framework like the one you see here to think through and plan your key steps for procuring and using removals. And we're going to dive into each step in detail shortly, but as an overview, we recommend starting by reflecting on your goals. What are the claims you hope to make? What budget could you plan to dedicate to a carbon credit procurement plan? And then from there, you can decide how to prioritize project types and procurement methods to fit those high-level goals. And finally, once you have determined those priorities and you have some purchasing options in hand, you would evaluate the specific quality attributes of the project opportunities that you're looking at and their alignment with your priorities through a due diligence process, choose the best options, and then make those claims that you planned at the start. So now we will dive deeper into each of these steps. So to begin, when companies sit down to reflect on their procurement goals, we recommend they consider how prominent guidance has already coalesced around certain best practices for procuring and claiming removals. And when we say prominent guidance, we are considering Science-Based Targets Initiative, the Oxford Principles for Net Zero Aligned Carbon Offsetting, the way the Greenhouse Gas Protocol treats accounting for carbon credits, and then also the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiatives, or VCMI, and their corporate claims guidance. So what are those best practices that all those pieces of guidance agree on? You can advance the slide, Emma, thank you. So first, prioritize reducing emissions within your operations and value chain first before addressing residual emissions with removals or other credit types. Second, as you approach net zero, focus increasingly on high durability removal credits. But at the same time, number 3, continue funding emissions avoidances alongside removals before and after reaching net zero to contribute to global mitigation. And then finally, ensure transparency and accuracy in carbon credit claims, which we explore further in the next slide, how exactly you can do that. So when beginning to think about the claims that you might want to make based on removals, you may first think of compensation-based claims, also called volume-based offsetting claims, since these have historically been the default for companies engaging in the voluntary carbon market. And this is an approach where companies buy credits to offset an equivalent amount of emissions. This approach does have 2 major issues, though. First, it can lead to prioritization of lower cost credits over credit quality if companies have to hit a certain credit volume on a limited budget. And this approach places really heavy reliance on perfect quantification of each credit, which is impossible to guarantee to 100% certainty within the voluntary carbon market. So that's because this approach is saying that every carbon credit is fungible with a real ton of ongoing emissions and can work to neutralize that ton of emissions. I do want to say an important exception to this credibility issue is when residual emissions are matched with high quality, durable removals in the context of an SBTI net zero goal, because having that goal ensures a high level of transparency around how much emissions have already been directly reduced by a company versus neutralized using credits, and transparency on what kind of credits the company is using to do that neutralization. So in the lead up to a company's net zero year, or in the absence of an SBTI aligned net zero target, we would recommend that companies consider another more transparent approach to claiming carbon credits. And that is the investment-based or contribution-based claim approach. So this model is recommended by SBTI and VCMI, and it focuses on allocating funds for credit purchases rather than hitting a volumetric target, which offers greater flexibility on credit type and price, and reduces reputational risk proactively by avoiding implying that equivalency between purchase credits and ongoing emissions. To determine how much to invest, SBTI does provide some suggestions. Some options include setting a percentage of profits or revenues as a carbon procurement budget, estimating costs of credits likely needed to address a certain emissions volume to create that budget, but then not holding procurement to that volume strictly, or using an internal carbon price. And next, we will discuss choosing project and procurement priorities for a credible strategy within the context of those claims that you plan to make. So to identify project type preferences and minimum quality requirements, we recommend that companies ask themselves questions like those you see here about their organization, again, in the context of their planned claims and their planned budget. So first, we have some key questions on volumes and delivery risk. So do you need large annual credit volumes? Can volumes ramp up over time? And what is your company's tolerance for fluctuations, delays, or non-delivery of volumes? The idea here is that if your company does have more flexibility around ramp up times, that could open up more opportunities to offtake from new nature-based projects, since biomass needs time to grow. Another example of how your answers here could drive project type prioritization is if you have really low tolerance for delivery fluctuations or unexpected non-deliveries, it may not make sense to choose a super nascent, innovative engineered removal and instead choose a more reliable project type like afforestation, reforestation from a project that's already operating. Next, we have cost. So do you have a maximum per credit cost? How important is it to minimize costs? A cost ceiling may limit project types included in a procurement, likely pointing more towards nature-based removal projects, since as we just saw, their supply is so much greater, and as a result, the price is lower than for more innovative engineered removals. For credit quality, we recommend that all companies establish minimum quality standards, but some companies may also prioritize certain quality attributes even more highly than others. So for example, if a company cared a lot about really high durability, like Donna was saying, hundreds to thousands of years, they might choose an engineered project type as a top priority, rather than nature-based project types. And then finally, we recommend that companies explore whether they have preferences for certain co-benefits or geographies. So are there specific environmental or social co-benefits or regions that align with company values or a company's footprint? After considering these questions, we recommend creating a tiered list of project type priorities to ideally lead into a diversified portfolio of project types that can balance costs and risks. We have a couple brief examples of what portfolios could look like on this slide. So these are two examples of portfolios offered by 3 Degrees, though a buyer could build similar portfolios in-house. And it bears repeating that while these example portfolios do focus on removals, we do still recommend that a broader portfolio should also include avoidance credits. So on the left, we have an example removals portfolio that weights nature-based projects at 85% of total volume, which could be ideal for companies that are newer to engineered removals procurement. And we have an average cost of $39 per credit. And on the right, the example portfolio places more emphasis on engineered removals, with nature-based projects making up just 47.5% of the portfolio, which increases average per credit cost to $85 per ton. And that approach could be ideal for companies that are specifically interested in helping scale engineered removals, but that are looking to avoid investing deeply in any one type of engineered removal, again, in the interest of diversifying cost and risk. Once the buyer defines their unique preferences for the makeup in terms of project type of their portfolio, they can move on to choosing commercial structures to actually procure those credits. So getting into those commercial structures, we're going to start with simpler options requiring less upfront investment and then get into some more sophisticated options. So starting with purchases from existing projects, choosing to buy from existing projects is lower risk in general than buying from projects not yet developed because the project has already achieved certification and the project's performance is observable. And buyers can use spot purchases, that is one-time purchases, for flexibility, but that approach can expose them to price fluctuations in the market year over year. They could also use forward offtake agreements, where the buyer agrees to offtake a set credit volume at a set price on an agreed delivery schedule, and that would offer greater price certainty still without upfront investment, but would lock buyers into a longer-term commitment. So now moving to the right into this blue box, again, new projects carry more risk. A buyer could still use a forward offtake approach here. That would still require no upfront investment, but it would require that future commitment, and it would be slightly more risk to the buyer because the project may still need to raise capital and needs to get off the ground successfully. Moving further right, a prepayment model involves paying upfront for credits, likely ending up with a discounted per credit price, but that does expose the buyer to greater risk from project performance issues. And then moving all the way right, equity investment is the riskiest option here in terms of upfront capital committed, but it does offer the greatest potential savings versus market pricing by allowing the buyer to fund project development upfront and then receive credits at no additional cost over time. For new buyers, we recommend starting with simpler structures like one-time purchases or forward offtake commitments, maybe as part of a buyer's fund. We also recommend seeking to procure from a mix of new and existing projects. And over time, as buyers gain more experience, they can incorporate more sophisticated procurement options as well. So next, for our final phase we're going to go over is actually comparing and selecting project opportunities before making purchases. So after prioritizing those project types and deal structures, companies may put out an RFP to collect project opportunities that fit those preferences, and then they will need to conduct thorough due diligence on the project opportunities that they receive, either internally if their capacity allows or with external help. And this is extremely crucial because project quality can vary widely within project types, as we saw with Calix's ratings earlier. Fortunately, as again we saw earlier with the Calix slides in Donna's presentation, there are ratings agencies like Calix that have come onto the scene to make identification of high quality credits more standardized and easier for companies to access and understand. And we think these are a great resource for companies to leverage as part of their due diligence to help point them to potential weak points in project integrity to look into more deeply and bring up with project developers. We also suggest that companies consult the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, ICVCM, for their approved methodologies. If a methodology is rejected by the ICVCM, we advise a great deal of caution if choosing to move forward with a procurement from that project type. Specifically, we think companies should be sure to understand how developers applying that rejected methodology have proactively addressed quality concerns that prevented the methodology from getting approved. Due diligence should also assess environmental, social, legal, and reputational risks, as you can see here on the slide. Companies should ask about community consultations and community benefits and look into potential adverse media coverage and any possible legal challenges. And while this process can be demanding, companies can build their capacity to carry this out through joining and learning from industry groups or buyers funds, subscribing to ratings agency services, going to dedicated conferences, and or outsourcing expertise, which we do recommend, especially for initial procurements. And if you advance the slide, we have one final point before we get to Q&A and discussion, which is that after conducting diligence and making purchases, we recommend that companies continue assessing the transparency and accuracy of their claims and reassess how their carbon efforts fit into their broader climate strategies over time, aiming to improve transparency and ambition continuously. So that brings us to the end of our prepared content, and it looks like we have a little over 10 minutes for Q&A and discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Tori, Donna, Alex, and Emma for all of that insightful information. We do have a few questions in the chat to address. Before I start to answer those, this is a quick reminder to please type in any questions that you have for our panelists. So I'll just read the first one that's come in. So given the Trump administration's recent policy shifts, such as freezing funds for clean energy projects and reducing support for international climate initiatives, how do you foresee these changes affecting the development and scaling of the carbon removal market in the US? And Donna, would you like to start off by answering that one?
Yeah, you gave me a hard one. I don't know that anyone really has a crystal ball as to what this means for the voluntary carbon market. I will say, I feel that some of the policy choices being made by the current administration, and I used to work for the US government. I was at the State Department for many years, working under multiple different administrations from different parties. I think what it means to me is that this voluntary action is even more important than ever, than before, if we want to live in a safe world decades from now. One thing that I can't remember who it was, Emma or Tori, showed us was the importance of taking action now, not waiting until 2030 or 2050 or when your target is. There's lots of opportunities to take action today. One of the beauties of the voluntary carbon market is that it also allows, unlike a compliance market, because compliance markets always integrate policy. So typically, when you offset your emissions, you do so with credits that are generated in the country, and that's a policy choice, right? It's sort of, if you think about it, America first, right? Like probably if we ever have an emissions trading system at the federal level, it will only allow for offsetting within the US. And that's true of the state level emissions trading systems we have today. But the voluntary market allows companies to purchase credits from the global south. And there is like an important climate equity issue, providing and helping those countries with their development needs, and those people and communities who have not caused the climate problem, right? Most of the emissions come from the global north. So the VCM is really unique in this regard. And maybe it's a long way of saying it can also help with the challenge of losing USAID funding, right? For a lot of those development priorities that are in our interest to fund. If I can just add that little op-ed at the end. So just a couple of thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree with everything that you said, Donna. And I think maybe I would return to the point that in the US that it's largely been through the voluntary carbon market that any sort of advances in terms of emissions reductions and removals have been made. So, the ETS that we have in the US are very small, they're localized, and they've only really recently started to engage with the broader voluntary carbon market. And so I would just say the lack of government support for carbon markets so far means that there's not really much support to be taken away from carbon markets in the US at this point in time.
Thank you both. Let's see here. We've got another question coming in. So, how do you all see corporate commitments evolving in relation to carbon removals? And are there any industries that are leading the way there? Tori or Emma, would you all like to chime in on this one?
Yeah, I can start here. So I think we are continuing to see companies commit to SBTI aligned or SBTI validated net zero targets. And companies stick to those targets if they do meet those deadlines after they commit to setting them and they set them. And that provides a really stable source of demand for removals as we get closer to companies' net zero years in 2040, 2045, 2050. So we do see demand for removals in those years as very likely to increase, which is one of the reasons why we recommend that companies get started with their removal procurements early, both to get their feet wet and to help the market scale in time for when those commitments come due. The industries that have been leading the way to date on removals, I would say, perhaps no surprise, in the early days, especially of innovative engineered removal technologies, was really the tech sector, who were willing to put forward funding for removals with those more uncertain delivery schedules, without penalty to the developer of those projects if deliveries were late or less than expected, et cetera. And that has played an extremely important role in allowing some of those more innovative technologies to scale. And then the last point I would make about how corporate commitments are evolving in relation to removals is we are seeing increased interest from companies on how infrastructures from the voluntary carbon market can be leveraged to account for within value chain emission reductions and removals. And that is an evolving space where we're still waiting for guidance to solidify, but I definitely would highlight that that is an area of growing corporate interest to take the lessons that we've learned from the voluntary carbon market in terms of how to really robustly quantify the impacts of removals and reductions, and bring that to something that's traceable within a company's supply chain.
Yes, absolutely. I have nothing much to add except that I agree that we're seeing a new forefront of maybe ag and food and bev, ag companies getting involved with soil carbon projects, methane projects, and as Tori said, exploring how to use supply chain reductions when supply chains can be so hard to trace. So I think it's a really interesting, innovative space right now that we're watching.
Great, thank you both. This question, I'll just open it up to everyone. It's coming in the chat. So have you seen any US states starting to establish policies about carbon removals?
I have a brief response to this, but I would definitely have to, go back and check, see what the current policies are. I know, no one would be surprised that California leads the way on policies, and they have a bill called AB 1305, which requires transparent claims on any use of carbon credits. It's not specific to removals, but they've looked to a lot of the guidance that Tori mentioned earlier, the ICVCM, the VCMI, right, all of this soup of VCMs, and they've looked at all that guidance about what a transparent claim looks like, what a high quality carbon project looks like to inform, thank you, I could not think of the word, to inform that policy. So basically, the only one I know of off the top of my head is California for US specific, but I know the EU has a task force out on exploring CDR specifically.
Yeah, maybe I can just jump into. I don't know that in terms of the trading systems that have been established in the US, like California or Reggie, et cetera, that there is a lean towards removals in the same way the Europeans are doing so for their ETS. Rather, if you look at what's eligible for offsetting in the existing state level systems, it's a mix. It's a mix of both avoidance and removals. So I haven't seen a lean into kind of a removals only policy in the same way that we're seeing across the pond over there in Europe.
Yeah, and I would say, sort of to bring it full circle with the theme, I think that Donna brought up earlier. So with California specifically, there's a policy that a certain amount of the claims, if you do use credits to claim emissions reductions or to count against your emissions target, a certain proportion of those credits have to come from projects that have what's called direct environmental benefits to the state of California. So they either are within California or within watersheds, like the Klamath River watershed that goes from Oregon into California. And so those are like these afforestation, reforestation, improved forest management projects. Reggie, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, has also started to explore allowing offsets, and those are offsets that have to come from within areas that are covered by Reggie. That program has continued to expand gradually. So, it could be that expands more, but that sort of, I think, speaks to this policy decision when you're actually thinking about compliance programs, and there's the opportunity for the stakeholders to make value judgments. And so California has said, okay, we want this to also have some environmental co-benefits, for example. And Reggie has said we want this to be a stimulation for the regional economy.
Super interesting. Thank you all for answering that one. And I think we have just about enough time for one more. And so we can just, each of you can just quickly answer this. So looking ahead, what needs to happen to scale the carbon removal market and make it more accessible?
Yeah, I can start with this one. I think that this is, I'll try to be quick, but I think this is any immature market needs both like demand and supply in interventions to make the market work, and then you need trust in the market. And so on the demand side, we need clear guidance for how corporates should incorporate removals, maybe policy signals to demand that they incorporate removals into their targets, and that bolsters up the demand side of things. But of course, on the supply side, we need costs to go down. We need supply to increase, at least for these engineered removals. And so that's where that, initial maybe offtake agreements and financing and R&D comes in. And so we need folks on the first mover side of things to put funding into those innovative projects. And then we need, trust in markets and governance, which has made a lot of progress in the last couple of years with BCMI and ICBCM and rating agencies and data. And so I think the market has moved a lot in recent years to build that up.
Yeah, to quickly build on that, I think the more companies can be transparent in their claims based on removals and avoidance credits, the better. That will help continue to build trust in the market and avoid media scrutiny. And if companies can use that more transparent contribution type framing for claims, that can also help free up some of the financing that's needed for those earlier stage removals technologies to get to scale.
It's hard to think of anything more. I think Emma and Tori have really covered it well. As I always repeat the motto of the ICVCM, which they've mentioned, build integrity and scale will come. And I think we're all working, all of us, in that space to build that integrity that will help shore up the confidence that the market needs to grow.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, sort of goes back to the Oxford principles that Emma highlighted. And so that at this point in time, the main division needs to be between projects that are additional and projects that are not additional, and projects that are economical and provide co-benefits versus projects that do not do that. And so it shouldn't be so much about a black and white, is this a removal or is this a reduction? But rather, how do we participate in the market for both removal and reduction credits? And then also with an eye towards scaling up the volume of removal credits globally in the years to come.
Well, that is all I think we have time for today, but I want to thank the audience for joining us, and I want to say thank you so much to our 4 panelists for all of that information. And if there were any questions in the chat that we didn't get to, we can reach out with responses to those. And everyone that spoke today, their emails are here on the screen. So if you have follow-up questions that you'd like to direct to them yourselves, feel free to do so. And with that, we can go ahead and close. But thank you so much again for joining us for Climate Day.